Okay, so for a brief video, I'm going to discuss the probably the last page of this pattern, McCall's Fashion Accessories number 2947, View F. I think there is some confusion. I know that I've had questions, and one in particular kind of stood out. So I thought, well, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and do a quick little tutorial, and we'll try to get that better explained. I did notice when I read through the instructions for View F and View G and View H, they are all basically the same exact apron, but their directions are different and their cutting out instructions were somewhat different. So you could cut out View F using View H as your cutting out guide. But the main thing I wanted to point out about that, if I'm going to do a complete explanation as to why I brought that up, is to show you in the cutting instructions, we have View F. It's telling us to use the apron pieces 13, 14, and 17, which are correct. But they have us fold this fabric, so we have a cut edge over here, we have a cut edge over here, and we have a selvage folded up here, and then the other selvage is there. Now, what happens is there's confusion about this right here, where this piece, number 17, which is that bias binding piece of fabric that you have to cut out to create your bias binding, this ends up with this weird, if you don't cut it out there, you end up with this weird off-angled L sticking out this way. So the clarification is not really there. You might figure it out on the pattern piece itself, but then again, you might not. So my suggestion is to try to figure out either a different way to cut out piece 17, and these are not written in stone, by the way. You can always use something that makes more sense. If you're trying to save or conserve on fabric, then by all means. My microphone just came unplugged. Okay, I think I'm in now. So anyway, if you're trying to conserve on fabric, you don't have to use this method, and it is very confusing for many, many reasons. You need one piece of fabric. That is all you need. So if you choose to use the cutting instructions, for example on H, they have you open out the fabric, and you've just got a single piece with the fabric opened all the way out. But I'm going to discuss the pattern piece now. So piece 17 is the pattern piece in question. Let me move this out of the way. And you notice a couple of things right off the bat. First of all, the grain line is clearly at a weird angle. It should be like this on your pattern, so that, or on your fabric, so you would have a cut edge here and a cut edge over there, and a selvage here, and all the way down at the other end, the other selvage. As long as you have this grain line pointing to a cut edge and a cut edge, where those arrows are pointing, then you should be just fine. You have to also make sure that you have enough fabric to encompass this giant piece of bias binding. for the bias binding. Okay, the other thing I want to point out is there are two notches. There's a notch on this end that's, you know, that far from the point. And then there's a notch way down at the other end that's a lot farther from the point. It's like 2 of my ability to reach an octave hand. So why are these offset so much? They're offset because once you have this cut out and you have drawn these 2 lines on your fabric, and trust me, you want to do that, it is almost, I would say it would be very hard to cut this piece of fabric out correctly if you didn't draw these 2 lines. So absolutely mark this notch, mark the other notch on the other end, and then draw these 2 lines. Now, conveniently, if you happen to have a straight ruler like this, why, you could just use this ruler to draw the lines. Now, I do recommend that you use, okay, I'm back, sorry about that. I had a dog barking incident I had to deal with. Okay, so I think I was saying, make sure you draw these lines, make sure that you use something that, you know, if you use a heat erase pen, you're likely going to end up losing a portion of these drawn lines once you've made this seam and pressed it open. So just be very aware of that if you're using that heat erase ink. If you use wash away ink or, you know, something that's going to stay, you should be fine. The other option is once you've pressed this open, you can then just go back and line up, you know, make a straight line and draw these 2. And then you are ready to cut. But I wanted to show you something. So once you have this, and we're going to pretend like this is fabric, not paper. Once you have this done and cut out, it kind of looks like that would be right. You're matching up this raw edge with this raw edge. But you can see that this notch and that notch are miles apart, and there is a reason for that. In case you've never made this type of bias before, if you've done it before, then obviously you know what I'm talking about. You have to offset this, otherwise you're going to cut this and you're going to have a tube, and you're going to cut this and you're going to have a tube, and this is going to be the remaining tube, and then you'll have 3 pieces rather than one long piece, which is what you need for this particular application. So to get that one long piece, we're going to offset and we're going to match up these notches just like this, and we will have, and I will pin this so you can see what I'm talking about, if I can find my pins, which are hiding. Okay. All right. So what happens when you do that is that the lines that you drew are going to intersect each other, and you will end up with an X. You might not see that on your fabric, but you can see that on this pattern. So here we go, and you definitely want to sew this at a 5/8 seam allowance. Oh. Okay, so as you can see right here, here's one of the drawn lines on this side, and behind it is the other line that you would have drawn, and they are clearly making an X. That is what you need to see. They should not be lining up in any way, shape, or form. Now, You will take this to the sewing machine and you will stitch from here to here with that 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then you bring it to your ironing board and press that open. So at that point you would have your fabric like this. You're over at the ironing board, you've made your 5/8 inch seam, and it is going to feel kind of weird stitching this way. The fabric it's going to want to flop kind of funny at the sewing machine. It's going to just feel all wrong and weird if you're not familiar and have not done this before. But this is what you would end up with if you had pressed open your seam allowance at this particular point. And as you can see, it is clearly offset. So no matter what you do, you're not going to get this end and this end to be like where they ought to be if you were trying to make this straight and squared up. And that's the way it should be, because when you cut it out, this is what you want. You want this big one long piece with that seam, that's that right there, matching the bias, which is what it does. It's not a straight on the straight grain, it's on the bias. So you should have that one and this one, so that you actually do have three, 1, 2, 3 pieces of bias cut, but they're all together, they're not separate. Okay, so that's been done, and then you just take your scissors with your fabric and you just cut right here. Follow the line, cut, 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 keep following the line. Now you should be here. Now you're going to keep cutting and following that line. Keep cutting, following that line, and you're going to end up at the end right there. So that's the way and the reason for that, right, the way that pattern piece looks. So then here you go. You have this big long piece of bias trim, and I recommend at this point that you go ahead and you get the ends, the short ends, folded in pretty on both the front, the one long end and the other long end. So fold them in and make them so that when they're folded together like this, you know, they look pretty. I mean, sometimes you have to kind of occasionally with these things, as if you'll notice, I have some little tucks in here, and that's to kind of help pull this end in so that it doesn't stick out like a dog ear, because we need it. And don't stitch this off yet, just leave that alone. And then of course the way we do this is we fold all the way down, long way, matching up the raw edges. So I'll do it on the other end. Okay, so what I'm going to do is square this off like this. Now you can leave it if you want to, but it's a little bit more difficult to deal with, and you're not going to have it that way in the middle for the waist tie if this is the neck end, and that'll all make sense in a minute too. Okay, so now I'm going to fold this in, and I'm just kind of eyeballing how much I want. It might tell you in the pattern. I'll look and see. Keep doing that. That's the wrong piece of instructions. Here we go. Turn under 5/8 of an inch. Okay. So 5/8 of an inch, Okay, and then we're just going to leave that just like it is. We're not going to do anything else to that end. We're just going to fold that under, press it, and leave it alone. Okay, now we're going to fold so that we're going to match up these two raw edges by folding this bias trim in half. And we're going to press because we want a fold line right down the middle on each, of each of the halves. We're going to open it back up and fold this long edge all the way down to this fold line and press. And we're going to do the same thing to the other side. Now, this method is one of those that, you see it everywhere. It's in patterns, it's in books, it's on YouTube, it's in every kind of sewing class, as far as I know, across the globe. But there are other ways that you can also do this. So this does not have to be your way. If you have devised a system or you have a trick or something, as long as you end up with this, and in this case, as long as you end up with this and you have that fold pressed in, because that's one of your guides, you're good. So whatever method you use to get this right here will work just fine. Okay, so now I have this little kind of a little fake apron here. Okay, so now this part, what you're going to do, you've got the whole thing that now looks like this, all the way down from one end to the other end. And then you're going to pick it up and cut it exactly in half, because you need the same amount on each side of the apron. So you match up these two and then you figure out where the half is. Don't stretch it or pull it, because remember, this is bias and it will pull out of shape. But you get it measured out and then you cut it in half. Now what that does is it creates two more of these. So you end up having to do this step on these two cut ends that I'm not going to cut because I might be able to use this for something and I don't know how long or how short it should be. So pretend like I've cut it. You then have to finish off the two ends exactly the same as these two ends. One will be the necktie, one will be the waist. So just do that part. Then put your apron down in front of you, right side up. So this is the top. This is horribly cut, but we'll just say this is the neck area. And to make it more believable, I'll fold it down and press it. Okay. All right. So now you're going to take 1/2 of your bias trim, and you have measured this person that you're making your apron for, and you know how much they need. I gotta fold some more here. To have to tie a comfortable knot around their neck. The thing about an apron like this is that that particular tie, generally speaking, gets tied one time in the life of the apron, and the one around the waist is the one that gets tied in a bow and then untied when the apron is done and then tied in a bow. But people just generally tie that one around the neck once and then they just hook it over their neck and then tie around their waist. So it doesn't have to be really long unless you want it to be, because it's not going to be tied in a big luxurious bow. It's just going to be tied. And I was going to look to see I don't think it gives you a measurement at all about the length of this and the length of the waist. So I'm going to read this. Nope. Fit along, nope. Nope. No. So this is basically going to be sort of custom so that you can make this bespoke all the way through. So it's going to be the measurement for the person. You don't want this up under their chin, in other words. So this has to be long enough to tie or loop or something around their neck, giving them enough distance from their chin to where this is supposed to rest comfortably. And then you also need enough of this to go and tie a nice bow around the waist. So at that point, you've got that measurement done. You know exactly how much you need. So you're going to leave that much off this end for the neck, and the rest of it will be for the tie around the waist. Now you're going to open up, so you've got a raw edge on the bias, and you're going to pin it from the neck edge right here all the way around what I'm going to call the arm side, because I don't know what else that could possibly be. It goes under your arm and around your waist. Have that go there. And then of course, because in an earlier step you finished this side edge that runs down the side of the body. So that would be all finished, as would the hem that goes across the bottom. So the remaining step is to stitch in this fold right here. Let me zoom in. I'm pretty sure it's visible, but I want to make sure. So where I pressed that right there, you are going to sew on your sewing machine all down that folded line. That is your stitch guide. You don't see it right here, but right here you do. So that fold, okay? Alright, so we're going to pin this now and pretend like these pins are stitches. Sewed that on that folded line, and now we're going to fold this over just like this, and we're going to press it, which I can do because I have glass head pins. So we're going to bring it over, we're going to press this like this. Of course you have sewn and I have not, but as you can see, that's what we have so far. Now we're going to flip it over to the wrong side of the apron. Now we're going to take this side of our bias trim and we're going to fold it this way. Just like that. We're going to go to the sewing machine, and I recommend doing this from the right side of your apron. You're going to stitch right along the edge right there. But you're going to start at the necktie. You're going to stitch across this and then all the way down the fold so that you're closing off that open edge. Stitch, stitch, stitch all the way around the arm side, and then all the way down to the end of the tie that goes around the waist. In my case, that's too long. But then again, you're going to be stitching along, la 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 la, stitch, stitch, stitch. This is going around the waist, and then you're going to finish off right there, and you've done one side. And then you're done. Your apron is complete. You've got both sides finished. You've got the necktie part done. You've got the waist tie done. You've done both sides. Your apron is complete. So, if you have any questions, the only thing I can think that might be an issue is this right here, if you don't catch the back side of this folded over bias trim, you might have to go back and do like some finesse stitching to get that to go down. However, a trick, especially for something like this, is to, when you fold this in half and you're pressing, press it so that one side is like this, a little bit beyond the front. And then when you're attaching this, it will be just off enough that it's going to wrap around and you can catch it when you're stitching along that edge. Now, do they tell you turn binding over the seam, which we've done, and pin in place, continuing to pin pressed under edges of ties together. Stitch pressed under edges of binding and ties together. Okay, we already know about that part. Fold, having, stitch along the crease. They don't give you that right there. I would call this a pattern lie, because they're not giving you the information that you really need to get this folded over and stitched in place. So that to me would be a pattern lie. That's what I call that. So in my book, what I would do is take a permanent ink pen, and you got lots of room to make notes, and I would just say, you know, this is what I did, and then write out how you finished off this, so that in the future, if you decide to make the pattern again, or you're sewing with, you know, a grandchild, a niece, a nephew, a friend, and you haven't sewn this pattern in 2 years, and all of a sudden it's a great idea to make aprons, you'll remember, oh, that's right, this was that confusing part. Okay, so I will leave it at that. If you run across any other issues with this, please let me know. I am very happy to help. I hope I have helped. And if you want to contact me, it's Laurie's Heirloom Sewing Facebook page, and I will see what I can do to offer some assistance. I hope everybody has a wonderful day. Today is June the 16th of 2020. We're still self-isolating, and I want everybody to take care of themselves and do something good for yourself. Thank you. I'll see you next time.